Okay, we have another all roster tier list. Let's pick what one we're going to talk about, and then I'll need to do some defense. Let's do big monsters. All right, as you can see, this will be a series of 12, if you're counting. This will be a series of 12 videos. But today we're going to rank all the big monsters against each other from every faction. Now, my artillery tier list got a lot of flame, and I feel like we need to defend that. I'll make it short. People, if you don't want to hear this, skip ahead like, I don't know, 3 minutes. But on the artillery tier list, people were saying I was trolling to get views, and then some of my defenders were saying it was only a multiplayer tier list, which both of those are not correct. I appreciate the defenders. I don't appreciate the haters. Bad haters. Bad. I do appreciate the people trying to defend me, because they're right, most of my content is for multiplayer. But I was trying to make these helpful for campaign people, but I feel like I didn't explain the premise right. So there were two things that people took issue with. Well, actually three, and one didn't make any sense to me. Some people were saying the entire tier list needed to be flipped, which, no, you're insane! You don't think a Skull Cannon and a Thunder Tusk are S tier even in campaign? Bro, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I have soloed in the Skull Taker campaign. I have soloed entire greenskin armies down in Lustria because they're just Savage Orcs, and with one or two Skull Cannons, you can infinitely kite them. You can just shoot them, and when you finally route one, yes, focus your fire, route one, you can chase it for free across the entire map, get all your ammo back, repeat, and you can literally kill a Savage Orc 20 stack. And that's not theoretical. I've done it multiple times. I just play it on ×4 speed while watching YouTube videos on the other screen. Take, because you're saying flip the whole thing. Take an Empire Mortar or whatever, which I put in D tier. Screw it, take 4 of them with no defenders and have Savage Orcs run over them. Wow. Savage Orcs can beat 4 Empire Mortars without defenders. Yeah, a Skull Cannon's better, because a Skull Cannon can solo an entire army. Now, maybe you disagree with where some of my things were placed, but to say flip the whole list is just insane. Anyway, I just had to get that off my chest. But the other two things, I'm going to try to explain better for this video so that people know I'm not trolling, but also I'm not just doing multiplayer. So the premise I said is that we're taking every unit in the whole game and putting it on one roster, and you have this magical, amazing roster, right? And so in S tier would be, you would always take this monster if you had the chance. A, you would take this monster most of the time, fine. B, it's niche. C, it's a little less than niche, but it's not actively trolling. D, it's actively trolling. Now, what you need to remember that people in the artillery video are getting mad for, and I don't think they remembered, is you have every option in the whole game. So when people are telling me, like, man, Empire Mortars are so good, why wouldn't you take them? Because you can take Queen Bess. Because you can take the Casket of Souls if you want a high arc firing thing that damages infantry. Like, you can take anything. The Casket of Souls is so much better. Like, and that was what I don't think people were grasping, where they were still like, well, in the Empire campaign, you need them. I'm like, no, fuck that. We're not talking about that. We're trying to figure out what is the best unit in this class, right? So if you went to the Olympics for this unit class, would Savage Orcs, I mean, Savage Orcs obviously aren't artillery, but like, would Savage Orcs beat up Empire Swordsmen? Right? That's what we're talking about. We're trying to figure out what's the best unit in the game in this class, not what is most useful to their campaign in a certain aspect, in a certain way, because that content's been done before. We're trying to do something a little different. We're trying to power rank different units and figure out who's the biggest, baddest monster, who's the best artillery, that kind of thing. That's what we're trying to do. Right. The other thing I saw a lot of that doesn't count here to me is, well, if you unlock this, and this technologies, and you have this lord that has these traits, and you have a level 40 hero that has these traits, then X unit is good. All right, dude. When I was 5, if I rode on my dad's shoulders and my dad ran, I was faster than all other 5-year-olds. But I'm not doing that then. My dad is. So I don't care if X unit is good, if a million other things buff it. Cool. Those units also could buff anything on this roster. And again, if you say, well, no, they can't because the Skull Cannon's not on the Dwarf roster, we're not talking about the fucking Dwarf roster. So in that theoretical scenario, all of your buffs could also just be put on the Skull Cannon, and the Skull Cannon would be better. So, like, anyway, even if you disagree, just try and remember those points, and then still disagree if you still disagree. But if you, yeah, there. Anyway, so no, I'm not trolling. All right, now let's do this. With all that, what is the best monster in the game? What would you always take on this theoretical roster where you have everybody? Would you take the Hellpit Abomination? No, but it's not trolling. That would be C tier. The Hellpit Abomination is just getting outscaled by the passage of time. He has moderate healing, but his heal proc is actually kind of terrible these days. And if he doesn't get his heal proc, he instantly kills himself and turns into a bunch of Skaven slaves. That's not great. His animations aren't very good. His collision attacks aren't very good. He can't turn very fast, and he's very expensive. But self-healing is self-healing. You know, it's hard to argue with that. He can heal himself. He'll take care of himself. Relatively high leadership, unlike some other things that are going to be on this list. He does not rout at the drop of a hat. And for Skaven, that's actually kind of nuts. Most Skaven monsters are terribly cowardly. So the Hellpit, peak. And if something sits directly in front of him, he'll duel with it okay. He has a really high anti-large bonus, pretty high weapon strength, decent melee attack versus that sort of thing. The only thing is he's weak to archers, he's weak to light infantry, and he can't clear infantry at all. So he's just a monster duelist that isn't fast, so he can't pick his own duels, but he's not terrible. He's okay. Stegodon. B. C? B. C? B. C. Yeah, C. Sorry. That was hard to decide, but he's ending on C. Stegodon's not that expensive, but he's also not that cheap, so he's kind of a mid price point. I think if he was 100 gold cheaper, I could put him in B, maybe 200 gold cheaper. He's decent against infantry. He's not a particularly good duelist. He'll rampage because he's feral. His leadership isn't the highest. Stegodon just is extremely armored, is quite nice. He's really good at disrupting stuff. And he's not a terrible duelist. He's just not a great one. I think he lands in C tier, though. He doesn't have anything he's good enough at to make him super worth taking. But if you grab a couple, you're not actively trolling. You're just probably being a bit silly. Stegodons are okay. They cause terror. They're tanky. Carnosaurs! Here we go. B. All the positive things I have to say about the Hellpit Abomination, minus the healing, applies to the Carnosaur, except he is a little faster. He is a solid-ish anti-large duelist, but his small profile makes him actually much harder to shoot with ranged. His higher speed makes it easier for him to get engagements he wants, and also his small profile makes it easy to team him up with another one and take two feral Carnosaurs and double duel something. So he can be good. He can be good at B. He's not amazing at killing infantry, though. That is a problem. His price point is also a bit lower than the Hellpit Abomination. You probably want to pair your feral Carnosaurs with some sort of healing support of some kind. But yeah, they can be solid. And being smaller is actually huge for a monster, because it doesn't matter. Size actually doesn't help you that much in a lot of cases. If you gave a Carnosaur 1,000 weapon strength and the Dreadsaurian 1,000 weapon strength, people would take the Carnosaur every time, because it's just more, it's harder to hit this thing, and it's more effective at dealing that damage. Now, collision attacks are a different animal. I think the Dreadsaurian has better collision attacks. I don't think the Carnosaur even has collision attacks. But just raw weapon strength and dueling wise, it doesn't matter how big you are. So Carnosaur's good at that. He's pretty tanky. He is a specialist. Bastildon Rev Crystal, A tier. Good support monster with obviously healing, but also he's immune to flanking, which can make it very hard to get him to rout off. So relatively high leadership because he doesn't take being flanked as a leadership debuff. Very tanky, high armor, so he can wade into infantry and honestly not take that much damage. Terror causing, anti-infantry armor piercing, good at hunting down small infantry heroes or lords. Just a lot of positives to say about this monster that doesn't cost that much. It only costs 1,000 to provide that extra healing. So, Bastildon Rev Crystal is pretty great. I honestly think if it could heal itself, it would be S tier, but its heal is unique that it can only target other units, which does keep him in A. But Rev Crystal is a very solid monster. I think you would see this quite a lot. Stegodon Machine Gun. The Stegodon with the bolt thrower was in the artillery discussion, and I think the Stegodon with the machine gun falls into B tier. Good poison support, which again, when you're talking about every monster in the entire game, The Lizardman roster, he's not valued that highly because everything and their grandmother has poison on the Lizardman roster. But in general, poison can be hard to access for some areas. So if you had access to the machine gun Stegodon, you might take it. Good poison, good infantry collision attacks, similar to the Stegodon and the Pastildon. Very, very, very tanky monster for infantry to deal with. Good terror, good collision attacks, all that stuff. But it's not a very good duelist. It's okay, but not a very good duelist with other monsters. Holds it out of the A tier. And it is higher profile than the Bastildon with the Rev Crystal, making it easier to shoot with armor-piercing missiles of like handgunners or cannons or something. And Stegodons are relatively slow, making it hard for them to dodge that sort of fire. So B tier, weak to infantry shooting them in the face. Star Dragon will be A tier. Keeping it out of S is its price point and its lack of self-support. Star Dragon is not a strong independent monster. It requires a team around it. But, you know, when it's backed up, it's very strong. A very, very strong flying duelist. Amazing single target breath attacks. And their breath attacks can do okay at an angle at dealing with blobs, but it is a little better at that single target breath attack type thing. Aerial dominance, I don't think there's maybe one or two things in this entire game that can challenge it in the air. Otherwise, you're going to get aerial superiority. And when it lands, it'll do a shellacking. Like all dragons, though, it is abysmally terrible at killing infantry in melee. It needs to rely on those breath attacks for that sort of thing, but it'll do great against cavalry, monstrous infantry, other monsters. The Star Dragon is very, very solid. Just pricey. Sun Dragon, however, is going to go down to C tier. Sun Dragon has every positive of the Star Dragon, just lesser. He is a bit cheaper, but his breath attack is weaker. His melee is weaker. His aerial dominance is weaker. He is still a dragon, and he has all the weaknesses of a dragon, so he really doesn't like to land in infantry that much. He is just the Star Dragon, but a little worse, lower stats in every capacity. Still okay. Just, if you have other breath attack options, you can skip the Sun Dragon, so he goes into C. Frostart Phoenix might be a hot take, but I think this is an A tier monster. Frostart Phoenix isn't an amazing duelist in its own right. It's not amazing at clearing out infantry, but what it does so well is it has multiple auras that help. It has like the freezing aura. Well, okay, the other one's not an aura, but it's frostbite and magic damage. So it's good versus demonic units. It's a really good support monster and incredibly tanky. Its aura does make other people deal less damage to it, increasing its tankiness, but it is a tiny bird model that's hard to shoot. And when you do, it'll kind of do this flutter thing where it freaks out and dodges most of the other arrows just by freaking out. So the Frostart Phoenix, insanely tanky, very good at support, very fast to get to whatever fights it needs to, and it's relatively cheap. I mean, none of the monsters on this list are going to be outright cheap, but the Frostart Phoenix is pretty cheap. So if you paired it with cavalry or any infantry that are getting into a melee fight, the Frostart Phoenix will make them all fight a lot harder. So its only real weakness is dueling other single entities and clearing infantry. Everything else, it's quite solid at a reasonable price point. Flamespire Phoenix, I'll put in B. It does have a self-heal, which is nice. The Frostart Phoenix doesn't have it. It has its little fire poops, which the Frostart Phoenix also doesn't have. But I feel like those fire poops don't do as much damage as some people give them credit for. They're nice, but I don't think they're crazy. And then it doesn't have the auras the Frostart Phoenix does, so it is just a duelist and an infantry clearer, which we discussed the Frostart isn't very good at, and this one isn't really either. But its fire poops, its self-regeneration, and its low price point do keep it out of C tier. I think the Flamespire Phoenix is fine. It's fine. It's not even a bad idea to take it. It's just kind of niche. But, you know, just use it for carpet bombing and chasing things off the battlefield. Moondragon, I'm also going to put in C. It might be tempting to like just say, well, if the Sun Dragon's in C and the Star Dragon's in A, this is surely in B. I just don't think so. The Moondragon is more expensive than the Sun Dragon. And it does slightly more, but not enough more to actually jump up a tier, in my opinion. I don't know. I just think the Star Dragon does. The Star Dragon is so much better of a fighter than these two are. I think he actually is worth his more price point. Well, I think the Sun Dragon and the Moon Dragon are kind of interchangeable, just depending on if you want to save a few bucks. But the Star Dragon is not interchangeable, right? He is aerial dominance guaranteed. Breath attacks that will absolutely fuck up a blob fight guaranteed. These guys are just kind of fine. So we discussed dragons enough. You can just repeat what I said about the dragons, except it's a moon dragon instead of the sun dragon. Great Eagle, currently D tier. Great Eagle sucks. I don't honestly know if this thing even causes terror. I know it didn't used to. It might have gotten that, but even if it does, this thing still sucks. Great Eagle has all of the weaknesses of the Phoenixes. Terrible at clearing infantry, not a very good duelist. But it also doesn't deal magic damage because it's not a Phoenix. It does not have fire poops or regeneration or an aura to help. And it's not that much cheaper than those guys. It's 800, 850 gold, somewhere in there. There's no reason to take it. And like in the same price point in this monster thing, before you get mad at me, you have the Manticore. The Manticore is somewhere in that list, and he causes terror. And he does more damage. Why wouldn't you just take a Manticore? No. The Great Eagle, it can't compete with any other monster. It's pretty darn bad right now. The only thing it's kind of good at is being a mount for various mages, but this is the basic Great Eagle. This isn't a mount. Like the Star Dragon doesn't get the benefit of Imric. The Star Dragon's good on its own. The Eagle is not good on its own. The Eagle is terrible. So yeah, Eagle, D tier. Hydra, B. Hydras don't get that much use in multiplayer, but they can be a solid monster overall. They are very tanky, and their regeneration is guaranteed, and they'll guaranteed heal cap while fighting. Their ground-based breath attacks are much harder to use, but in campaign they can be pretty solid if you use them there. In multiplayer, you really won't use them that much, but yeah. The Hydra's not A tier or S tier because it's pretty expensive, but as a standalone monster, it's okay. I also think the Dark Elves don't synergize super well with it, but just comparing it to its compatriots, yeah, the Hydra would be seen in some places. It is very good as a central distraction, Carnifex, terror-causing unit that you can't ignore, but also can't quite take down. He's solid. Now, he has scaly skin for a bit of missile resistance, but he is still very weak to missiles as a tall, not super armored monster. But if you get him in melee, he's fine. He actually clears out infantry okay. He's not one of the better collision attack monsters, but he does his job. Decent duelist, decent fighting cav, decent at doing everything besides getting shot. So just keep him away from archers and he'll do some good work for you. Also nice because you don't have to take a healer for him. He is a natural healer. Black Dragon. I'm going to put it in C with the other dragons. Now the Black Dragon does do more for his price point than the Moon and the Sun Dragon, but that price point is significant. I think it's 2,400 or something. And I don't know if he's worth all that, so he's going to have to get healing support. He's worse than a Star Dragon. His breath attack is actually kind of worse than the Moon Dragons, in my opinion, for damage. That's a gut instinct. That's a feel. It's not a fact. But I feel like its breath attack is worse than the Moon Dragons, and it just has a little bit better stats. Now, again, you can't treat this thing as the mount. You have to treat it as the Black Dragon, the naked Black Dragon. This one doesn't have Malekith on it for Soul Stealer. This one doesn't have a Sorceress on it for Soul Stealer. It has no self-healing. It's just a kind of meh dragon, which you have the Star Dragon. Why bother? Mutant Rat Ogre. C. The Mutant Rat Ogre suffers a lot of problems. I'll start with its positives that keep it out of D. The Mutant Rat Ogre is small, making it very good at teaming up with another monster to 2v1 something. And it has a relatively low price point compared to other monsters. Relatively low. But that's where the nice things I have to say about it end. The Mutant Rat Ogre has relatively low leadership, low armor, making it weak to small arms fire, weak to getting stuck in spears or halberds. And it has the absolutely insane design decision of being mostly anti-infantry, but then it has an animation where it runs and jumps at something while swinging its hands over its head like a gorilla. But more than half the time, that animation will take it over the target it's firing at, so it'll automatically miss. It's not a melee attack versus melee defense thing. It'll automatically miss because it never made contact with its target. Ugh. The Mutant Rat Ogre can just be so frustrating. And when he's fighting a large target, I did say that they can 2v1 something nicely, but it also has insane knockover animations for itself. So I was once in a video where I said it's the worst monster in the entire game, which since then, I don't think it's the worst monster in the entire game anymore, but I still think it's bad. the Dreadsaurian wasn't even facing it, and it did that jumping attack on the Dreadsaurian, but the Dreadsaurian's tail hit it midair, and it just went flying backwards, and then took 60 years to stand up and get back into the fight. So, the Mutant Rat Ogre has pretty terrible animations that are just overly expressive. He just doesn't do enough to be worth taking, but it's okay at dueling other large things just because it won't jump over them. Brood Horror is D tier. Brood Horror has self-healing and it is fast. That is it. Its leadership is so abysmally low that it'll rout in the face of anything. It's not good at taking out infantry. It's not that good of a duelist. It's not good at anything, and its price point is not cheap. If this thing was 800 gold, I might consider taking it for some cheap terror that's healing, but it's like 1100, I think. 1100 or 1000. It's not cheap to take a basic Brood Horror, and they are not worth it at all. Basic Brood Horrors are terrible. Arcane Phoenix. This is going to be an S tier monster. Arcane Phoenixes they get all the positives of Phoenixes and Eagles, right? Small, very hard to hit. And then they even get that attuned to magic thing where they get damage resistance if your winds of magic are high. But their vortex that they can fire, I think they have 2 uses of it, does do a lot more damage than the fire poops of the the Flamespire Phoenix. And they just have really good dueling stats that so far the other Phoenixes haven't had too much to say about it. So they can actually pack a bit of a punch, and they usually pair up with Techless or something else to make a little goon squad. But their small profiles plus a wallop that they can pack make them dangerous, because then you can't just shoot them like the Star Dragon, King of the Skies, but also handgunners will have a field day shooting him. Handgunners won't get it nearly as much on the Arcane Phoenix. So yeah, Arcane Phoenix just gets a little bit of that leg up over the Star Dragon. Feral Wyvern, D tier. All the weaknesses of dragons we have discussed ad nauseum, but you don't get a breath attack. That should be enough to convince you that this thing is not worth taking if you have dragons. It cannot compare to dragons in any way. And there are 3 dragons in C tier that are keeping this thing in D. No breath attack, no moss. You are dead to me, Feral Wyvern. Your HP pool is not even that high, and you are way too expensive for what you do. No, you stay in D tier, and you think about what you did. Rogue Idol. Might surprise you, but I am going to put this in B. This thing is not a meme at all. It's just not often used, but he can be good. Rogue Idols are very, very solid at killing multi-entity things. They're great at fighting cavalry, they're amazing at fighting infantry, and they're pretty bad at fighting single entities. Their animations are just too slow to get good hits on single entities if those are trying to dodge or if he gets distracted. Also, he's crazy weak to archer fire and cannons. He has high armor and a very high HP pool, but still, he's just so big that all ranged units are going to hit him. They're just not going to miss. And he's too slow to really chase anything down, so he can kite it out a lot. But if you know your opponent's going to be in a defensive formation and they have nowhere to run, if they have to fight the Rogue Idol, they will lose. They will lose badly. And he does have a little bit of support factor. He gives global leadership as long as he's above 25% health. So, yeah. Rogue Idol's quite solid. He's just niche. You need to have the right situation for him to be in. Bloodwrack Medusa. You're going to go in A. So Bloodwrack Medusa has been nerfed. And it's not must-take on Dark Elf rosters anymore. But I still think that this thing is A tier. It is niche, but it's so good in that niche, I think it stands in A. This thing can decimate infantry, absolutely destroy them at range. And it does have hybrid duelist stats, so if it gets closed in with cavalry or something else that's been weakened ahead of time, it can usually beat it. Now, if a full health duelist monster catches the Medusa will lose, and it'll lose pretty badly. But if that duelist monster is at half HP or a third because something else has been dealing with it for a bit, the Medusa can hold her own and fend that thing off. She has really good squirreling animations for getting herself out of trouble. So if she's surrounded by halberds you don't want to be surrounded by, sometimes her animations will just make her go out of it, and then from there you can path to safety without having to push too many of them aside. And like I said, her range shot is really good at taking out halberds. It's pretty terrible against other cavalry, though, and her duelist stats don't do great versus cav. Light cav, she'll do okay, but heavy cav will usually take her down. So avoid enemy cavalry. And her serpentine body and low profile does make it difficult-ish for archers and handgunners to truly shoot her. Now, I mean, if they have open line of sight and she's halfway down range from them, yeah, they're going to hit her and they're going to mess her up pretty bad. But if she's at the edge of their range capacity and there's a whole bunch of chaos going on between you and them, a lot of those arrows are going to miss or the bullets will go high. So she can be rather elusive in that aspect. The Dread Saurian. Did I keep the other Dread Saurians in here, or do I have all of them in one? Looks like all of them in one. So the Dread Saurian in concept, feral or otherwise, it's going to be an A-tier monster. It is very expensive. All versions of the Dread Saurian are expensive, but they do a lot of work. And if you provide it with any healing support, it will take care of you. Very high weapon strength. They just recently got collision attacks too, which means now it can clear out infantry as well as cavalry, as well as monsters, as well as your lord. The only thing left that the Dread Saurian is weak to is getting 2v1'd, I suppose, because he is gigantic, so a lot of things can find him. Like Double Gorgon can both find space to hit him. So I guess he is weak to a 2v1, and he is still a little weak to ranged fire. But he is so fast, and his charge animations are so good that actually he can run down most ranged units quite easily. I think the only thing that keeps him out of S tier is his price and his size. His size makes it easy for ranged units to hit him, and like I said, for him to get 2v1'd. But also, like, he is pretty darn expensive, where the Arcane Phoenix can generally take care of itself. The Dread Saurian does need someone to hold its hand. It's the Star Dragon of the ground. He'll win you a fight. You just gotta help him out. Rotting Leviathan. Previously this thing would have been C or even D tier, but I think it goes into B now that it got collision attacks. Now it is a monster that specializes in clearing out infinite amounts of infantry with its really good charge animations and its insanely high armor point with a massive health pool, and it's undead, so it's unbreakable. I mean, it'll crumble, but it's not going to run away. This thing is really good at churning through front lines, churning through halberds even. It doesn't stay in the halberds. It needs to charge them and then move away. But yeah, can run down archers decently well. Has some gunners on its back that I've never noticed them do anything ever, but it's whatever. And it's this, for once on this list, this unit is not weak to ranged fire. There's a lot of units here that are weak to ranged fire. That's generally how monsters are countered. But the crazy high 160, I think, base armor for this guy means you need dedicated armored piercing missiles if you're going to do anything to him. And then he has a giant health pool. So even then, it takes handgunners a lot of volleys to take down the Rotting Leviathan. But terrible duelist. Not very good against cavalry either, to be honest. It is just about killing infantry, but he can do it all day. Be pretty happy doing it. I think he's a little spency, but not terrible. Deathshriek Terrorgeist. You'll go in D. It's just a worse dragon, kind of similar to Wyvern. At least he has self-regeneration and a breath attack, and he's undead, so he won't rout. So he has all that above the Wyvern, but he is also more expensive. His attacks are kind of duelist focused, so dragons are bad at killing infantry in general. We've established that, but he is extra bad at killing infantry. He's not even that good at killing cavalry. So if he gets stuck in melee with anything that is not a single entity, the Deathshriek Terrorgeist is going to have a terrible time. His breath attack is not nearly as good as any dragon's breath attack at clearing out blobs. So this guy is uniquely focused to killing single entities, and then at that, he's not even the best single entity duelist. In the sky, the Star Dragon is better than him for a bit more gold. And then the Star Dragon's also better at helping the ground fight. So the Terrorgeist, for him to be out of D tier, he would need to be the king of the skies, and he just isn't. He's okay. So, no. Terrorgeist, you don't beat out the Wyvern. You're down in D tier. Bloated Corpse. I didn't know where to put him, but he's kind of a monster. He's a single entity monster guy. I don't know. He's D. He's D. He's not that expensive as far as monsters go, but his only function is blowing up infantry or cav, and that's only if the infantry or cav are clumped. And if they're more expensive than him, because there's a lot of infantry cav that is cheaper than the Bloated Corpse, and then you're still trading down for blowing them up. So you need to blow up elite infantry. But if a single entity or an archer shoots at you, you're just going to blow up before you get into combat. Bloated Corpse is pretty bad. It's good at punishing AI in campaign, I guess, if they don't shoot it, which honestly, the AI have been shooting it, so dang. Charybdis. Charybdis is a C tier monster. It's almost as good as the Hydra, but it doesn't have that insane healing the Hydra does, and it doesn't have the Hydra's ground-based breath attacks. It does have significantly more anti-large dueling prowess, and it has a -8 leadership screech thing that I think, yeah, -8 or -16, that's constant. You can't avoid it with immune to psychology or anything, so it is nice for debuff blobs. But without the healing, the fact that it's tall and easy to shoot hurts it a lot more than the Hydra. The Hydra can just tank through the healing, no problem. He'll just heal it off. He's fine. The Charybdis doesn't have that luxury. So the Charybdis really needs to find a cavalry fight to support, a low leadership faction to abuse, or a single entity monster to duel. If he doesn't find one of those three things, he is literally worthless, where at least the Hydra is a bit more generalist. So I don't think you'd see the Charybdis really. But he can work versus demonic factions, which is why he's in C and not D. Demonic factions hate dealing with the Charybdis because that -8 leadership AoE is brutal for their demonic instability crumbling. Kemrian War Sphinx. After the buffs, this boy is in A. Really good at cycle charging through infantry. Also does a lot of damage to cavalry. The only thing it is not, literally the only thing it's not good at is fighting other single entities. It's terrible at doing that, and I admit that. But as long as you keep it away from other single entities, the Kemrian War Sphinx can do a lot of work all across the battlefield for you. Very fast, great at dealing with any multi-entity models, and it is undead, so it'll start crumbling, but it will never rout, it'll never abandon you. The Kemrian War Sphinx, very, very solid, quite versatile on the battlefield. Tomb Scorpion recently got collision attacks and terror, so that brings our beloved boy to B tier. This man is a distraction Karn effects that you just can't ignore. He doesn't do that much damage, honestly, but he's just super tanky and very annoying for archers and other ranged units to escape from, and his tunneling charge attacks make it easy for him to pounce straight through a front line and get onto those archers that he's trying to distract for you. His tiny model makes it super hard to shoot him, and cavalry don't surround him great. I mean, they get around him, but then his underground charge attack can sometimes take him to safety. His tiny hitbox makes it so that like not too many cavalry units can group up around him and stop him. So this little Tomb Scorpion can cause a lot of disruption and destruction. The only thing that's negative about him really is he doesn't do much damage. That's it. So he's in B tier, I guess, because he doesn't do too much damage, but he's just a nuisance for your enemies to deal with. Necro Sphinx is an S tier monster. With the collision attacks and the changes, he has all the positives of the Kemrian War Sphinx. He is very fast. He wrecks cavalry. He also does a good amount of damage to infantry. He is undead, so he's unbreakable. He's going nowhere. But then he's also an amazing anti-large duelist. So nothing counters the Necro Sphinx. Now, ranged units can get a couple shots in on him, but like his brother, the Kemrian War Sphinx, while this guy is tall, he has very explosive animations that can sometimes make him dodge range shots just because they're aiming where he used to be, and then he does like this big shing shing and goes really far forward, so everything behind him misses, right? He's kind of tanky to ranged fire in that way. He is pretty expensive, but that's not enough to take him out of S tier. He is an S tier monster, very good, very strong generalist that you would always want on your side. Pyro Titan is a D tier monster. He's terrible. He has some Winds of Magic buffs where like he has a bound Spirit Leech and a bound Shem's Burning Gaze. Whoop-de-doo. I'm doing the little finger circle, the sarcastic finger circle of whoop-de-dooing. Those are pretty limp spells to have one or two uses of, and then I think he has some Winds of Magic regeneration increase, but that's it. He is supposedly supposed to be good at clearing out infantry, and he's not. He's not a good duelist at all. He's terrible versus cavalry. He's very weak to ranged fire. He is incredibly slow, and he doesn't even kill infantry fast. He is everything. He's everything the Rogue Idol is, and then terrible at the one thing the Rogue Idol's good at. He just sucks. The Pyro Titan's terrible. Vargulf. A tier monster. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about the Vargulfs on the Vampire Counts roster, but they have been impressing me recently, and on other rosters, I could see them doing very well. Self-regeneration, unbreakable because they're undead, pretty decent weapon strength, very fast attack animations, very fast movement, and they have some hitbox issues where a lot of ranged fire will go straight through them but not deal damage if they hit certain parts of the model. So Vargulfs can be deceptively tanky. The only bad part about them is their leadership is actually super low. Even for an undead, their leadership is low. So sometimes these guys will flat out disintegrate the minus 55 one at like half HP. That's rare, but it can happen, so I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. As we've said with some other monsters, they also have a very small profile, which makes them nice to pair with other dueling monsters, because then you can 2v1 something effectively. And you might be wondering what I'm talking about with that. Try 2v1ing something with 2 Rotting Leviathans. They get in each other's way a lot, and they're very difficult to get on the same page. Try it with 2 Vargulfs and 2 Mutant Rat Ogres or something, and they just buddy up side by side effectively and get a lot of hits in. So Vargulf is like that. Nice and small, so we can get in easily with other things and help hit a big monster. Vargulfs are nice. They're cheapish, too, for big monsters. Regular Terrorgeist. D tier. Exact same things as the Deathstreak Terrorgeist. I have nothing else nice to say about the regular Terrorgeist. He's just kind of bad compared to other dragons and other things. Self-regeneration is nice. Undead is nice. He's not going anywhere, but his breath attack is ass. And he is a high price point for what he does. D tier. Giant! B! Giants are living their best life right now. You know what? A. That is an A tier monster. Good job, Giant. Giants are weak to one thing and one thing only, ranged fire. And again, a lot of monsters are. Ranged is the natural counter to monsters. But the Giant is just a stat stick. He is an insane amount of hit points, very, very high weapon strength, one of the highest weapon strengths in the game, and crazy high melee attack. He's pretty bad at killing infantry, but he can do it. He's good at killing cavalry. He's good at killing other single entities, and he causes terror. And Giants are actually relatively cheap for the stats you get. You know, they're not the most expensive monster out there. A lot of the other stuff in A tier is more expensive than the Giant. The Giant's just chilling. He's doing good. He's helping out. And 2 Giants can beat 2 Necrosphinxes, and the Necrosphinxes are an S tier. Now, the Necrosphinxes are tankier against ranged fire and much faster and have better collision attacks than the Giant, which is why it's up in S tier. But just saying, Giant can beat it. Beat its ass. Love Giants. Giants are amazing. Big fan. Arachnarch Spider. You know what? Fight me. D. Arachnarch Spiders are terrible. This is not the Regiment of Renown, so you don't even get the summon. So you're thinking about the base Arachnarch Spider. Low leadership, high armor, but still somehow weak to mass ranged fire with their massive bodies. They're super easy to hit. They're kind of fast, but not that fast. They have the Hell Pit Abomination problems of really janky attack animations getting them in trouble, and slow turn radius also getting them in trouble, where something will attack them at the side, and they'll just kind of take a million years to turn and fight it, and just get hit like 6 or 7 times. They have anti-large duelist stats, but nothing to back it up. Like, they're still a pretty bad anti-large duelist. They can't take on anything else that's an anti-large duelist, and they don't make up for it anywhere else. They're pretty bad at killing cavalry. They're awful at killing infantry, and a meh duelist. The Arachnarch Spider offers nothing that these other monsters can't do better. Mammoths! Do I have other mammoths or just the War Shrine? I'm just wondering if I'm lumping in all mammoths. Looks like this is gonna be all mammoths. If not, I'll correct it. But mammoths, C still, unfortunately. Mammoths, whether they're the War Shrine or the terrible ones, Feral Mammoth and the regular War Mammoth are terrible. The War Shrine is the only one worth taking. Anyway, War Shrine's okay. It offers a bit of support. It has a nice little aura it can provide. It's okay at clearing out infantry. It does have good collision attacks, but it is so inconsistent about getting the good animations to use them. Sometimes it'll do this charge that ends before the infantry. Like, if you tell it to charge infantry that's standing still, sometimes it'll do this thing where it swings its head side to side and then peters to a stop, but it didn't hit them. It stopped before them. And then it just walks into them and starts fighting, but it's like, it didn't do the collision attack. I don't know. And they're very weak to missile fire. Like, they're not low to the ground at all. They don't have that much armor. They don't have that much missile resistance. They have a high health pool that tries to mitigate it, but it doesn't mitigate it enough. Not ideal duelists. Yeah, mammoths are just kind of C. They're okay. You use them if you need to fight a lot of armored infantry and you want to have a front line that it has leadership problems. You can use its leadership buffs on the War Shrine to keep your guys in the fight, and then it'll kill those armored infantry for the whole game, but Keep it away from anything that's good against large targets. Frostworm, the next dragon type, but instead of the Terrorgeists or the other poo-poo dragons, it's in B. Frostworm is solid. It's various slowing attributes. I think it has the chilling aura. I don't think that's just the RR, but I could be mistaken. I know it has frostbite. So if you get it locked onto something you want to hunt down, it can slow it so much and keep up with it, whether it's on the ground or in the air. It's very difficult to get away from the Frostworm. Frostworm's breath attack is quite solid. It's similar to other dragons, but I think that extra utility of the slow, plus a slightly lower price point than some of the dragons we've seen on this list, do make it just up into B tier, just a little bit better. If you want a dragon that's not as expensive as the Star Dragon, the Frostworm is the Chaos Frost Dragon is a good choice. Treeman, D. Treeman does not hit very hard, is not very good at being supportive, is not that tanky. He's tanky, but he's not that tanky. He's not cheap either. Treeman sucks. Treeman's terrible. We're not talking about the Treeman Lord. We're talking about just the Treeman monster. This thing is terrible. Just terrible. Forest Dragons, C tier. All the negative and positive things I have to say about the other dragons, but applies to this dragon. It's pretty expensive and it's not a Frostworm. It is fine, but not great. You would just take one of the other dragons that are above it. The Chaos Frost Dragon, sorry, or the Star Dragon. Don't bother, but it's okay. Manticore. B, but barely. The Manticore has seen better days. Warhammer 2, it was objectively OP. Now, its only thing that's getting it into B is its crazy low price point. This is an 800 gold flying terror piece. That's all it is. It is okay at dueling. It is okay versus infantry. It is okay versus cavalry. It is okay. But it is 800 gold, and it is flying terror. It can rear charge a lot of low leadership factions. Excuse me. And knock out their front line, get them to tear out and help you get through. That's all it is, that's all it does, that's all it pretends to be. It is fine at that specific job. Dragon Ogre Shaggoth is gonna go in C tier C. C because of speed. It would have been D tier, but he is pretty fast. He's an anti-large duelist that can get where he needs to be and get into a good fight. Can do okay versus cavalry, terrible versus infantry. Not that weak to ranged. He has scaly skin and not the biggest model, so a lot of range can miss him, but he's not a great anti-large duelist. He's solid at it, and his speed gets him where he needs to be, so I guess he gets into C tier, but he doesn't do enough, really. He's not insane enough of an anti-large duelist to get him all the way up to B or A on that one niche alone. He doesn't have a lot to back it up besides that. Troglodon, D. This thing sucks. It is terrible in melee of all kinds. It is purely a kite monster, which some people wanted it to be in the artillery component, but I think it doesn't have enough range to even be an artillery piece. It's medium range at best. And its shot misses more than you think it should. And when it hits, it doesn't even do that much damage. The Troglodon is pretty frickin' bad. I think he's terrible. He is in D tier. Quaddle would have been very different on this list, but recently got some buffs, putting the Quaddle in S tier. I think any faction would love to have the Quaddle. Good stealth aura beneath it can protect you on the way in, so only artillery can shoot at him, since they can't see what's beneath him. And then his serpentine body, while he's flying, dodge a lot of artillery and ranged fire, making him insanely tanky to ranged ammunition. Which, as we've established while talking about this list, monsters are weak to ranged units. So when you have a monster that is uniquely tanky against ranged units, that's pretty freaking good, because there's not a lot of things left that hurt him. He's a terrible duelist. And that's his niche, is like, you have to duel him with something, and then the Quaddles will lose and have a bad time. But their collision attacks are amazing at clearing out infantry or just causing mass disruption. They are flying, so they can get into whatever fight they really want to. They're pretty fast. They have bound spells, Chain Lightning, and a Renan's Thunderbolt for clearing out blobs. They don't do that much damage to cavalry, but cavalry also doesn't do that much damage to them. Quaddles aren't that expensive as far as monsters go. They are very strong after all their buffs. And you've been seeing them a lot more on the Lizardman roster too. So, yeah, get them while you can. Quaddles, very good. Jabberslythe, A. Its only weakness is dueling. Pretty strong against cavalry, very strong against infantry as long as it keeps getting its charge bonus. And then it does have an AoE Mortis Engine Drain type effect if your leadership is low. And then I think it also has a bile. It does. Does it do the corroded armor? Or is that the ROR? It just does poison. I think it just does poison in an AoE every so often as it charges through stuff. No self-regeneration, pretty tall hitbox, but its crazy animations make it amazing at charging, but it also makes it very tanky against range fire, because if you start moving, it's kind of jumping around and bobbling all over the place. It does make it hard for archers or handgunners to draw a bead on it unless they're at extreme range. The Jabberslythe is very, very strong. Just keep it away from other anti-large duelists. Gorgon, another S tier monster. Pretty good at killing infantry. Not as good as its cousin, the Jabberslythe, but pretty good. Decently expensive monster, but it's self-healing when in melee. Its amazing anti-large dueling stats make it strong against cavalry and other single entities. Again, this guy is pretty weak to archers, but similar to the Dread Saurian, his amazing speed and charge animations can get him onto most range units quite quickly if they're isolated, like one or two of them are around. Now, obviously, if he is blocked up by a bunch of monsters and he's getting shot, he's going to have a bad time. But just saying, like, there's some spears fighting him and huntsmen shooting at him. He can usually just path through the spears easily and go get those huntsmen and kill them. And then he'll regenerate in melee while chasing them down, which also can make him a good hit and run fighter, because if you route something, you can just have him chase it and heal while he's chasing it, and then he can turn around and come back stronger and better than ever. I think I grabbed all the soul grinders separately. I tried to. It's hard to go through these data files sometimes. But the soul grinder of Tzeentch specifically, I didn't lump them together like the mammoths because the soul grinders all do very different things. Soul grinder of Tzeentch is now going to fall to B tier. He's taken several nerfs from being the king of the ring, and now he's just kind of okay. His poke isn't that intense anymore, and it's only good versus single entities and artillery. He's good at killing enemy artillery. But he's a ground-based meh duelist. Meh versus cavalry, not good versus infantry. The only reason he stays in B is he is still pretty good at killing single entities and artillery, like we mentioned. He is very fast and responsive, so he's good at dodging incoming enemy fire. And after he uses all of his ammo, you're usually in the late game, and then his terror can start coming in, so he can just charge into wounded infantry or wounded cav and terror out them. So after that, he kind of becomes a little supportive, but yeah. B tier for his really good lord sniping, and then that lord sniping can lower enemy leadership and make his charging in the late game even more effective. Lord of Change is going to be C, if not D. I'm going to go with C. Not a good combatant in any sense, but it is a flying terror piece that's pretty tanky, and it has bound spells. That's about all the nice things I have to say. It doesn't have the highest price points. You're not expecting the most out of him, but he's a pretty bad combatant against all types of things. Not terrible, but pretty bad against anything. Just good for extra spell disruption. Soul Grinder of Slaanesh. D tier. Anti-large armor-piercing monster that has pretty bad animations for doing so. It has a stagger that, while it looks cool, when it like gets hit, it staggers back and goes like, ugh! Oh boy, oh, I got really staggered there. Oh boy, I gotta stand back up. And you're like, wow, that looked cool, but also you got hit like 3 more times while you're doing that Shakespearean play. So I would have liked it if you had just gotten up right away. Soul Grinder of Slaanesh is pretty terrible. It's demonic, so if it takes enough damage, it will just crumble away into nothingness. But unlike its Soul Grinder of Tzeentch cousin, it has no ranged attack, so it has to get into melee, making him pretty bad. Speaking of pretty bad and getting into melee and pretty bad and terrible, the Keeper of Secrets is horrendously bad. It has some bound spells, but they're pretty underwhelming. And this thing is so weak to ranged units. I know you're tired of me saying that, but it has 5 armor, and I don't think it even has a shield. If it does, it's a bronze shield. This thing dies immediately to basic archer fire. It's not that good versus cavalry. It's not good versus infantry. It's just a duelist, and it's not even a good duelist. The regular Keeper of Secrets is flat out terrible. Stonehorn. E tier. This is not the harpoon launcher Stonehorn. This is the basic Stonehorn, but insane versus cavalry and infantry. Decent duelist, incredibly tanky, and very fast. Nothing to complain about, really. The only reason it's not in S tier is it's a little big, making it easy to get hits on with ranged units or good surrounds from cavalry. It's not a very good single entity duelist. Makes it easy to hit him with those. And I don't think his leadership is particularly high, which does mean he can route off and kind of leave you high and dry. Does need healing support, which the ogres normally provide in abundance, but you'll have to bring it on this theoretical roster of everything, right? So still A tier, but has a couple little weaknesses. Ogre Bulls, that's a cool monster. You're not supposed to be here, get out of here. Soul Grinder of Nurgle. B tier for different reasons. Soul Grinder of Tzeentch and it are very similar in their melee prowess, but their gameplay pattern is different. The Soul Grinder of Nurgle is really good versus cavalry and multi-entity infantry. It's not good like the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch is at sniping out single entities. So they just have different targets, but a lot of the same strengths. Both are very good. Just B because they're kind of singular. Like the Soul Grinder of Nurgle can't do anything against single entities at all. And the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch can't do very much against multi-entities at all. So they're both kind of B. A Great Unclean One, C. Some decent bound spells, some decent dueling stats. No, he's D. He's D, as I was thinking about it. He's too slow. He's too tall. He's not good enough at clearing out infantry or cavalry to be worth taking over some of these other monsters, and his bound spells aren't that good. He doesn't have the Mortis Engine Drain of the Exalted Great Unclean One. This is just a regular Great Unclean One, so he's pretty terrible. Not even that good of a duelist. And he's so slow that anything that he wanted to duel could just walk away from him and be fine. Beast of Nurgle, very similar. Well, I'll put it in C. You don't see them often in multiplayer, but they can be okay. Can be okay in campaign, but yeah. They do have the -8 melee attack aura, which can be nice, and they're self-regenerating, and they're cheap. They're only 800 gold. So I guess that gets them into C. There's not a lot of reason to take this thing, but I guess you can have it wandering around your front line as kind of a pseudo-support unit and a bit of a distraction. Does not do a lot of damage in any capacity whatsoever, so I would be careful with it, but you're also not spending that much, so I guess it's okay. It's okay. Snow Leopard! B. Snow Leopard gets away with its insanely low price point to get into B. This thing is 650 gold. It's very fast, a Frostbite anti-large armor-piercing duelist. Usually you'll see 2 or 3 or 4 of them in like a goon squad that just chase something down and nibble it to death. Individually, they're not that impressive, but again, they're also only 650 gold. And they're very fast. Teeny tiny as well, so they're almost impossible to shoot for ranged units in any capacity unless you are just standing out in the open right in front of one. Then yeah, you're going to get blasted. But otherwise, ranged units can't hit this little guy. He just needs to avoid getting stuck in too many halberds. He needs to avoid getting stuck in cavalry. But he would love to duel a single entity or to run down some ranged units for you. He's a very good boy. Elemental Bear. C, but gosh darn it, so close to D. The only thing that's keep it out of D is that it is unbreakable now. It's a construct or whatever, so it has the demonic instability crumbling. But the ground-based breath attacks, at least its breath attack does some decent damage, and at least he does some damage when he gets into melee. There's not a lot of nice things to say about him. He's expensive, he's tall, he's clunky. But he can do okay. I would put him at the bottom of C, but I don't think he's quite D. I think the Elemental Bear is That breath attack does a lot of work for him. Ground-based breath attacks are not nothing, because you can get good side shots down the line of infantry and take them all out. Soul Grinder of Corn, D as well. He has a shotgun, so he's not like the Soul Grinder of Slanesh where he has no ranged, but it's so minimal, and you can't target it willingly that it's pretty hard to make good use out of the Soul Grinder of Corn when there's just a lot of better options. Again, he's pretty whatever in melee, and even on the Corn roster, there's a lot of better things at melee, so why bother with the Soul Grinder, right? He just doesn't compare too well to the other monsters in this list, and there's a reason you don't see him. He's fast, he's kind of armored, but it's just limp. He's not that good against cav or infantry, or other single entities, to be honest. Bloodthirster, solid, B. Flying Duelist, good at getting area superiority, decent at landing into cavalry a little bit, doesn't like fighting infantry, doesn't like getting shot at. That's pretty standard stuff at this point. Not the craziest high price point, but it is a little high. Besides the Star Dragon, he'll usually get control of the skies quite nicely against any other flying monster on this list. Frostheart Phoenix, Quaddle, Arcane Phoenix don't really want to tango with a Bloodthirster for too long. But outside of getting aerial superiority or landing on one lord, he is a bit niche. So, lands him in B, not all the way up in A. Terracotta Sentinel, C. Unbreakable, decent stats, very tanky. He's just a worse giant, but Not the worst monster in the world. High weapon strength when he hits. Some pretty cool charging animations that can get him out of a bad situation or get some decent collision attacks down or something like that. But pretty slow, pretty gangly. Not that expensive. I think he's 1,600. Whereas the Giant's 1,400, but the Giant's also an A tier, so take that. But, you know, he's not Elemental Bear expensive. So there's that. And he's decently armored, so he's not that weak to ranged fire, honestly. Terracotta Sentinel's all right. He'll get done when he needs to get done. Just, Toad Dragon! C. Also has a breath attack, so I guess that's that, though it doesn't do that much damage. It has decent charge animations that can get out of trouble, though its collision attacks feel bugged because I feel like they don't do that much damage at all. So, not a great duelist. Not great in cavalry. Very expensive. Very weak to archers. It's just the breath attack and the high hit point pool that keeps it out of D tier, because it is pretty tanky, and it's decently fast at running around and being annoying. So at least not too slow to get where it needs to be. But it's got just enough utility to stay out of D. Jet Lion. C. It has some good support functions. It provides yin and yang harmony, not both, but you know, one of them, or Grand Cathay, so it can get around and support units that need its form of harmony because it is pretty fast. It has Missile Mirror, which can be niche and strong, and I think it also has a spell resist aura. I believe that's what Airstrikes was just talking about today, if I remember correctly. But this thing is a terrible duelist. It does no damage whatsoever, so it is purely supportive, and at that, it is a pretty high price point to ask for the kind of support stats. Its cousin, the Jade Lion, is D tier, because he's the exact same but has worse support stats, and his bound spell is not Missile Mirror. It's a shitty little Jade Breath thing that is just, it just does no damage, and you only have 2 uses of it. It's pretty god-awful. I'm going to move these monsters up here. So yeah, Jade Lion, not good. Not good at all. Jet Lion, can be good. Jade Lion, no. Mutalith Vortex B. B. He's pretty pricey, but he is fast. He is a Mortis engine, and that's not a thing a lot of rosters have access to. So I'm sure they would love to have the Mutalith Vortex Beast to punish big blob fights. As long as you take out the enemy range units, the Mutalith Vortex Beast can vibe and just kind of drain everything down. It duels okay. It does good damage to cavalry and infantry. And like I said, it's great in a blob fight. You usually don't want him out in the middle of nowhere by himself, but as long as he's in a big pile of enemy and friendly units, he's just living his best life. And that drain is very, very nice. Just take out the other range units. Cockatrice is the worst thing in the game, and I hate it so much. I hate it so much. It has a net and it's flying. End of good things. It's expensive. Its animations are terrible. Most of its animations get it into more trouble. Like, it does this thing on the ground where it like rears up its head and then charges forward in like an S pattern, but it doesn't do enough collision damage, and it usually gets it deeper into the enemy lines where I don't want it to be, and it just gets killed off. This thing is horrendously terrible. If its net was on a cooldown rather than a one-time use, I would consider moving it all the way up to B, because that's pretty badass. But it's not, so it's not badass, and the rest of this just sucks. A Manticore is better in practice. Not on paper, but in practice, a Manticore does more damage and does more work and lasts longer than a Cockatrice for 300 gold less. Ugh. Ugh. Cockatrice disgusts me. It is terrible. Elemental Incarnated Beasts, I'm tempted to put it in C tier, but because of that Mortis engine effect, just not a lot of fast monsters have the ability to AoE drain everything down. And then he has that minus leadership roar he can do that is really good versus low leadership factions. So those will put him in B tier. Very solid in a blob fight. Not a great duelist, but since he's good in a blob fight, he's good versus cavalry and infantry, as long as he's not alone. Obviously, if you jump him into Chosen with Halberds, he's going to die, but as long as you're fighting on top of your own Marauders, those Chosen with Halberds will get ground away by his Flock of Doom aura. Again, same as the Mutalith. Keep him safe from archers, and he'll do well for you. Bale Taurus. That is the Bale Taurus, not the Great Taurus. This is the one with Breath Attack. Breath Attack 1, A. Bale Taurus is actually very solid. High hit points, fast speed, high weapon strength. A pretty pitiful Breath Attack, but it is still a Breath Attack, and honestly, without it, he'd still maybe be an A. Bale Tauruses are very solid. So as a monster, you'd love to have one. Really good duelist, good versus cavalry, decent versus infantry. Not that weak to shooting because his flying animation is so all over the dang place that he dodges a lot of that stuff. Bale Taurus is actually pretty darn good. Great Taurus will go into B. All of the same positive things about the Bale Taurus, but slightly lower melee stats, slightly lower class point, and he doesn't have that little breath attack. Just kind of puts him in B. He's a more buff, more expensive Manticore, which, I mean, fair. Fair enough. How many more do we have? Do I have to shift around here? Not too many. We have 4 more. Okay. Kadai Destroyer. After the buffs, I'll put him in C. He's not great, but he's not objectively terrible anymore. He got some collision attacks. He got some weapon strength buffs that can do him okay. His stuff that he takes to charge up still takes too long. Takes quite a while, even in campaign, to get him fully charged on his passive. I think that gives him physical resistance. But he's whatever. He can hit infantry-sized characters, which is a lot of what the Chaos Dwarves need him to do. He can do okay, and he can get healed by some of the Chaos Dwarf guys. Now, I guess on a global roster, you maybe don't want to take a Chaos Dwarf hero just to heal this guy. Maybe you could hit him with life magic, I suppose. But anyway, he's okay. He's in C. Not like I'm going to take him all the time, but high weapon strength, fast monster is generally hard to turn down. Colossal Squig in cars has been bullying me about this monster. He keeps saying I need to stop calling it terrible, so I guess I'll put it in B. It is a fast anti-infantry monster. It is weak to ranged fire, but who isn't these days? It's also not a very good duelist, but it can take out cav or infantry, and it can generally get where it needs to go with a high speed. And when it dies, it does this weird little explosion that does some damage. Not a ton, but Any punishment for killing me is welcome, I guess. And it's not the most expensive monster in the world for this list. And finally, I need to adjust the D tier for maybe the worst monster in the game if the Cockatrice didn't exist. It's the Slaughter Brute. Slaughter Brute, I honestly just want to say he's flat out bugged. I think he might be. He has crazy high weapon strength for doing literally nothing. He has 600 weapon strength, and yet when he hits something, I hear the squeaky toy noise, the me. It just does nothing. His gimmick about being unbreakable until his lord is routing or dead is neat, but most of the time he just dies. It's not about him routing, he just dies because he sucks. He's so weak to everything. He's weak to infantry, he's weak to ranged, he's at killing cavalry, he's as a duelist. He has no strengths, and he is wildly expensive. He's not even close to one of the cheapest things in this roster. I think he's 2,400, which is a good amount for a monster, and he just doesn't back it up with anything. The Slaughter Brute has no redeeming qualities. He's just terrible. And finally, Lammasu, I will put in A. The Chaos Dwarves don't get a lot of use out of him, but I think that's just a shame, because I think the Lammasu is a very spooky niche monster that a lot of rosters would love to have. A flying silence aura with some bound spells and terror would just harass mages and follow them around, make sure they can't cast any spells. It would be very potent. The reason I don't think you see him too much on the Chaos Dwarf roster, and it's a shame, is because the Chaos Dwarf Lord has one of the best items in the game, and it's when your enemy casts spells, you heal. So taking a mount that stops them from casting spells is usually the exact opposite of what the Chaos Dwarves want to do. Which is why he doesn't get a ton of play on their roster in multiplayer, but I don't think that makes the Lammasu a bad monster. I think it's just unfortunately asynergistic with its own roster. But as a monster on its own, I think it's A tier. I think it's solid. Silence is very strong. So there's it. There's all the monster tier list for the entire game. Again, before you go in the comment section and say a bunch of negative things or downvote the video like the artillery tier list, remember what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to make a tier list of the monsters on their own strength, not the rosters they come from, right? When I was talking about the Giant, I didn't talk about Wah. When I was talking about the Tomb Scorpion, I didn't talk about the Tomb King's passive healing. Like, we don't care about what lords can buff them. We don't care about what sub-factions can buff them. We don't care what technologies can buff them. How good is the monster when you summon it in with a generic lord at level 1 and it has to fight other things at level 1? That's what I was caring about for these guys. That's what the list is based off of. I think this is a pretty good list. I think the Gorgon, the Quaddle, Necrosphinx, and the Arcane Phoenix, I think most people could agree they're very good monsters in their own right. I think a lot of people could agree the Slaughter Brute, the Cockatrice, the Jade Lion are pretty terrible. So hopefully this list doesn't get the number of negative comments where people were like, this whole list is inverted and it's wrong. It's like, how? Brother, how? Just go into Skirmish versus AI, load up any of these monsters and do anything I was talking about. You're going to see how terrible they are. You're like, nah, dude, Nikaya has like 7 abilities to make a Troglodon do a bajillion damage. All right, but that's the Kai. That makes the Kai good, not these monsters. Because try using the monsters without Nikai. Anyway, goodbye, everybody. Roar.
Subscribe, yes, yes.